You're looking at an arpeggio pattern that makes use of the 4 top strings on the guitar, string 4, 3, 2, and 1. You notice that the pattern has very clear symmetry. Here are a couple more arpeggio patterns, likewise very symmetrical, and here are all 3 of them together. And this is what they sound like. The first arpeggio begins on F, 4th string, 3rd fret, then moves to A, 4th string, 7th fret, C, 3rd string, 5th fret, E, 2nd string, 5th fret, G, 1st string, 3rd fret, and B, 1st string, 7th fret. F, A, C, E, G, B. B, G, E, C, A, F. If we take this arpeggio and we identify all the notes based on their chord degrees, so in other words, if F is note number 1, A is 3, C is 5, E is 7, G is 9, and B is 11. So we have a root, a 3rd, a 5th, a 7th, a 9th, and an 11th. That makes this an 11th arpeggio of a very specific type. We're in the key of C, and the arpeggio runs from the 4th to the 7th of the key. F is the 4th of the key of C, B is the 7th of the key of C. Of course, we're talking about the tritone, the distance from the 4th to the 7th step of the key. And the tritone is the center or the fulcrum of the symmetry of the diatonic system. So it's no wonder that this pattern has its own very clear symmetry. Since the 4th step of the key coincides with the Lydian mode, we could call this a Lydian 11th arpeggio. Or we could call it a major sharp 11 arpeggio. And if we wanted to add 2 more notes to bring it back to the root note, we would simply add a D and a F at the end on the 1st string. Think of this big arpeggio you just played as the center of your arpeggio universe. And on one side of the center arpeggio, we have a kind of zigzagging shape, which is a minor 11th arpeggio. Begins with a minor 3rd, followed by a major 3rd, followed by a minor 3rd, followed by a major 3rd, followed by a minor 3rd. It simply goes minor, major, minor, major, minor. Very straightforward, very simple. It's a zigzag shape, beginning on the 1st finger to the 4th finger, taking up only 4 spaces on the fingerboard this time. A on the 7th fret, C on the 10th fret, E on the 9th fret, G on the 8th fret, B on the 7th fret again, and finally D on the 10th fret. So we have the center arpeggio in the middle, this minor 11th arpeggio above it, and below it we have another minor 11th arpeggio that is exactly the same shape, but this time in the open position in this key. But the shape is identical. So it starts from the open D to F on the 3rd fret, A 2nd fret, C 1st fret, open E, G. That's D minor 11th, A minor 11th. So far we've left out the 6th string and the 5th string from these patterns in the interests of focusing on the core symmetry of the note system on the fretboard. Because the patterns are symmetrical when those strings are left out, it makes it easier to then add in those additional notes. I'll show you what I mean. If you take that center symmetry, that center arpeggio, the one that begins on F and leads to B. Now, of course, just like any pattern on the guitar, whatever goes on the first string, the highest pitched string, will also occur on the lowest pitched string. So we already know that the notes G and B on the 3rd and 7th frets will occur on the 6th string as well as on the 1st string. And that leaves simply one more note to complete the pattern, the D on the 5th string. We've got G, B, D, F, A, C, E, G, B. So now our center pattern is complete, all 6 strings. Well, what about the other 2 patterns? This minor 11th starting on A, ending on D, and the minor 11th that starts on D and ends on G. Well, just as with the center pattern, the 2 high notes occur also on the lowest string. So we have a B and a D on the bottom and a B and a D on top as well. And once again, there's only one additional note to complete the pattern. In this case, that note falls on the 8th fret, F. So we take the zigzag, we add F, and then those 2 bottom notes. Of course, the same thing applies to the open position, where we have an open E and a G, an open E and a G at the top, the zigzag, and the missing note is B. B on the 2nd fret. Interesting that the missing notes, the notes that complete the picture, are in fact B, D, and F, the notes of the diminished triad. So what do we do if we want to understand how these arpeggios work in different keys? Well, the first thing you need to understand is how the arpeggio relates to the key itself. And it really helps if we start thinking in terms of key degrees rather than simply note names. We want to connect them to the musical ideas that we're going to play. So this center arpeggio, if we go down to the lowest note in the pattern, that's going to be a G. And so we could say it's a dominant arpeggio because the G in the key of C is the 5th of the key, and it's the dominant key degree. And I think I prefer doing that rather than, say, naming it after a mode or a particular, chord, simply because we are only concerned with where the note that begins the arpeggio, the lowest note position, where is that in the key? Since it's the 5th key degree, we're going to call it the dominant arpeggio. And if we go to the open position and play the arpeggio we have there, well, that's on the 3, and the 3 is the mediant of the key. So that's the mediant arpeggio. And if we go to the 7th key degree, B in the key of C, well, we could call that a leading tone arpeggio or a leading arpeggio. You could name them after modes. This would be the Locrian mode arpeggio. This would be the Phrygian mode arpeggio. But the key here is that we know where we are in the key. And I'm going to stick to using key degree names. So the first key degree is the tonic, the second is the supertonic, the third is the mediant, the fourth is the subdominant, the fifth is the dominant, the sixth is the submediant, the seventh is the leading tone. And back to the tonic again. So we're going to take our dominant arpeggio, our center arpeggio, and move it up a whole step. Now we're in the key of D. And another thing about this arpeggio, when you play these two notes that line up on the same fret, and that's the only time that happens in any of these three patterns where the two notes line up on the same fret. It just happens that that's the tonic and the third of the key. When we were in the key of C, that was a C and an E there. That's the center of the key. That's the starting point for any key, is on the second and third strings on the guitar, where the tonic and the third align. So in the key of D, we have that happen on the 7th fret. And there we have it. Now, the other arpeggios, the leading tone arpeggio and the mediant arpeggio, are positioned so that your 4th finger in the mediant arpeggio, that's where your 1st finger is going to go for the dominant arpeggio. And where your 4th finger is in that arpeggio is going to be where your 1st finger goes in the leading arpeggio. So anytime you play this dominant arpeggio, doesn't matter where it is. Well, let's say we're in the key of G. Now that would mean that the center of the dominant arpeggio will actually fall on the 12th fret. That means that the mediant arpeggio, my 4th finger will end up on the 10th fret, and now I've got all this space over here. What do I do with that? Because this was at the open strings before, this thing I just played. This was where the open strings were before. This was where my 1st finger is. That was where the open strings were, right? So what comes before the open strings? Well, this is an interesting subject, because the open strings, which are all natural tones, all notes belonging to the key of C, remember that that's the same as the 12th fret. And so if we want to understand what happens below, theoretically, below the open strings, as if there's another fret position there floating around in space, what would it be? Well, it would be the 11th fret, wouldn't it? Well, what's on the 11th fret in the key of C? Nothing. There are no notes belonging to the key of C in the 11th fret, and it just happens that that is the only fret position where there simply are no notes belonging to the key. And every key has this one fret position where there are no notes that are part of the key. All of the notes in that fret position are outside the key. I like to call it the void. So when we are in the key of G and we play this big arpeggio down here, and then we play this one here, well, the void, that's going to be next. So if my 1st finger is on the 7th fret, the void will be the 6th fret. There are no notes in the key of G on the 6th fret. And the leading tone arpeggio is now rooted on the 2nd fret. And finally, let's look at the structure of all of these 4-string arpeggios that we started with. We started with 4 strings, and we're going to go back to 4 strings. And we're going to take those 4-string arpeggios and we're going to deconstruct them symmetrically. Let's take the 4 top strings and those 3 arpeggios again, this time in the key of D, so we can move away from the open strings. Now if we take all the arpeggios and see what happens when we move one note in from the top and the bottom at the same time, and then move again one note in from there. As we eliminate the top and bottom of each arpeggio, we find that we can work our way down to the center. And in the center of the outer arpeggios, the ones that were the minor 11ths at each end, we end up with a minor third. And at the center of the middle arpeggio, we end up with a major third. And that major third is the tonic of the key, the 1 and the 3 of the key of D. Focus entirely on that arpeggio, that center arpeggio, and build out again from the middle. We find that we extend out from the F sharp to an A, from the D down to a B, and what do we get? We get a minor 7th arpeggio, or a minor 7th chord. That is the 6th chord of the key of D, B minor 7th. And if we continue to add in a note at the top and the bottom, we find ourselves back where we started. We can do the same thing with the minor 11th arpeggios. Start with those minor thirds at the middle of each of them, add one additional note, and we end up with 2 major 7th chords, 2 identically structured major 7th chords, the D major 7th and the G major 7th, which are the 1 and the 4 chord. Add another note to each, and we are back where we started. Approaching these arpeggios symmetrically opens the door to a different kind of musical journey. Starting on the low note of each one, going to the high note, then moving up from the bottom and down from the top, one note at a time. Looking for commonalities within the pattern. For instance, D major third, D major third, D major third, F sharp minor third, F sharp minor third, B minor third, B minor third. Go from the highest note in the group to the lowest note in the group. Each one has 4 corners. Play the corners of each box, then the middle. Start from the lowest note in the arpeggio, go to the highest, and then play the next 2 notes descending. Or start from the highest, go to the lowest, and then play the next 2 notes ascending. Of course, the bottom notes of each arpeggio form their own symmetrical pattern. Let your imagination go wild. The idea is that you know where the notes are, you know how they're connected to each other, you know where you are in the key. And of course, there are plenty of other arpeggio patterns beyond these. But these particular patterns maintain a very clear symmetry, which provides a really good foundation. So let me know what you think. Don't let me know what you don't think. Or maybe do let me know what you don't think. And I guess I'll see you around.